Connecticut.
And how many generations of your family have lived in Collinsville?
3.
Going back to
1870,
where they came from
Sweden.
to work
That
at?
would be my grandfather came from Sweden.
To work at?
Father and mother, both born in this country, both had relatives in Sweden.
Ah. And your father came here to work where?
Collins Company.
Very good. When you were drafted, what boot camp did you go to?
I went to boot camp,
Yeah, where?
South Carolina.
And how long was your training there?
Must have been around 8 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks.
And how did you feel about that? You're coming from a small town and suddenly you're in boot camp.
Well, boot camp was intended to humiliate anybody who showed up there. And if they couldn't do it by language, they did it by exertion and running and calisthenics and anything to humiliate you.
Which must have been pretty rough from a little small town boy to suddenly find himself in.
I gotta say, I didn't suffer anything, but we had to keep up with an awful lot of, gotta think of a polite word, nonsense.
Well, you learned to salute and say yes, sir, whether you agreed with it or not.
Right.
I think that's part of it, yeah.
They didn't ask whether you agreed with it or not. There was only one way.
Do you remember any of your instructors when you were there?
Sergeant Crabtree.
And
Can you imagine any sergeant that you might run into whose last name was Crabtree? He was so disliked that in our platoon, which was a platoon of about 80 men, at the end of the session, we disliked him so much and praised the three-stripe sergeant who was in that same group that we came up with quite a sizable kitty for him, but not for our DI, who had challenged us and humiliated us for 8 weeks.
did you pull any pranks on him?
No, I don't think so. No.
That would have made it worse.
He pulled a lot of pranks on us.
So after boot camp, then where did you go?
Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina. And almost in my entire platoon went to Hawaii. And I don't know why I was put into a separate category, but there was about 4 or 5 of us out of 70 or 80 men who were sent to Camp Lejeune. It might have been because I ended up in signal company, and my background, college experience had been in electrical engineering, so that may be one reason. But that's what I did. I ended up with the 2nd Marine Division, Headquarters Battalion, Signal Company. And my first experience there was that I was expected to be able to climb telephone poles with gaffs. And I went to Norfolk for a 2-week instruction period on how to climb a telephone pole. And the reality of it was that when we got back to go into the field and had to run telephone lines, there weren't any telephone poles. So you had to climb trees with gaffs in order to go up a tree and hang and tie telephone wire from tree to tree so that you could get a telephone communication. And thank God that didn't last very long. I got out of that area and went into a radio operator and became a radio operator. Well, that meant that you had to learn code, and yes, I did learn code, and never was high speed, but I could get along all right in Morse code, so that was a little easier on the body than trying to climb trees with gaffs.
Where were you when you were climbing the trees? What area?
Well, we went on maneuvers and we went into the Caribbean, and well, you probably read in the paper about an island called VHP. And VHP was an island in the Caribbean in which was bombarded, and we practiced amphibious landings with LCVPs with the drop front, and you managed to practice the same thing that would have gone on had anybody been shooting at me at the same time, but luckily nobody did. But that was hilly jungle country, and it was incumbent upon anybody who was there to have to wear a full field pack, carry probably a coil of wire on your back, and climb up a 400 foot of elevation up a hillside, so just so you could get it up to the top, they could throw it down again.
Oh, boy. Oh, and hot, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. What was the highest rank you?
Corporal.
Corporal.
Yeah.
And what was the most memorable thing that happened to you?
Well, late in my experience, I was aboard an AGC, which is a naval terminology for a vessel, and it was the command ship of, well, in radio terminology, COMLAND. That meant he was Commander-in-Chief, Atlantic Fleet. And he was aboard this ship, and we were touring in the North Atlantic through a awful storm. And even the petty officers on board made the complaint that they hadn't been through this type of a storm before. And visually, you get to a situation in a storm of that sort where the deck is rolling left to right so that it's at about 45 degrees. You cannot see across the deck to the water on the far side because the other part of the deck is up in your line of view. And off to our starboard side in the swells is a seagoing tug. And when that little baby goes down into the swells, the only thing you can see is the radar mast and the radar turning mast on the seagoing tug. The rest of the ship is lost in the swell. Did I last through it without sickness? No. Sick as a dog for 2 days, maybe 3 days.
Oh.
Navy experience, of course, they said, well, you got to get up and get fresh air, and you got to eat. Well, fresh air on the deck that's slanted at 45 degrees is not a good place to be hanging around very long. And as far as eating, since the Navy was able to eat, well, Marine Corps is Navy, but the gobs were able to eat, and they had priority. So if you were up on deck and you wanted to eat, you had to stand in line for 25 or 30 minutes in a surf and storm conditions, and that didn't appeal to me either. So. So
Oh,
that's something to remember, I'll say that.
oh, that sounds dismal. Do you have any more stories like that?
No.
Um,
Well, we go back a little bit. I get started telling stories, but on our way to boot camp, we were by train, left Hartford by train, got into Washington. I think they left us on board a sleeper overnight. I don't think we got off the train. But in the morning, we had to border the Atlantic coastline. The Atlantic coastline ran down from Washington south along the coastal Route 17 and Route 1 now. And straw seating, open windows, and the seating was so that you could flip the back of it one way or the other, so that you could, if you were going south, you could have the back in front, back of you, and if you're going north, you'd flip it the other way. Everything is fine. Steam engine, locomotive. Soon as that locomotive goes around the corner with the billowing smoke out of the stack and the windows open because it's hotter than Hades, all the soot comes back into the compartment where you're riding in the train. How's that for a story?
that sounds dismal too. You must have had some more uplifting ones, maybe. Did you get any entertainment? Like I asked people, did you see Bob Hope or any of the stars that we're hearing about?
No, I don't remember anything of that magnitude, although we were able to find USOs, and USOs in, well, Lejeune, the nearest major city was Wilmington, North Carolina, and they had a good-sized USO, so we would frequent that. But no, we weren't in any theater of war, so that we didn't see Connie Francis or Bob Hope or any of those.
Dorothy Lamour, none of that. Did you have any R&R? Did you have any free time all the time you were in? I mean, did they send you?
Well, I'm trying to think. Believe it or not, the only thing I can think of about non-service free time was that I was in a glee club once, and we were on the radio and from Camp Lejeune. And I don't remember the local radio station, but they got the group together and went in there, and we sang Big Shots on the radio.
Great.
But
that sounds fun. Be your own entertainer.
I don't remember any other curricula that I had.
Did you?
Oh, I guess I pitched horseshoes, but we didn't have any team efforts or anything like that.
And did you win?
Can't say. I must have.
I think so,
At
too.
least once I must have won.
Did you have any injuries?
Not serious. No.
That's good. Here's a funny question. Did you have anything that represented good luck? Did you carry anything with you that was supposed to be good luck?
No, I don't think of anything.
You're not the superstitious type. I didn't expect you to. Did you keep a diary?
No.
Did you write lots of letters home?
Oh, some I'm sure, yeah. But it was, well, I guess telling stories again. But boot camp was quite an experience on the basis that your first humiliation after you get off the train is to pack 50 guys in standing up into a stake body trailer truck and stand up to go 30 miles so we can get into the boot camp, you know, and there's 50 guys standing upright until we get there. And you get issued your equipment, and along with your equipment is a galvanized 14-quart pail, that big at the top and that big at the bottom. And so now you've got to learn the science of being able to pack all your belongings into a sea bag, one sea bag. You have to get everything in there, all the issues, including this damn pail. And 2 wool blankets, and the wool blankets, by experience and theory, had to be laid out in a triangular fashion and then rolled, and then re-rolled into a disc about this size so that those 2 blankets could go into the pail, which is at the bottom of your sea bag. And if you didn't do that, you were lost. You never could get all the issue of clothing, uniforms, skivvies, hats, the whole thing into a sea bag.
Did any just plain not be able to do it?
No, everybody had to do it and had to do it over until they could accomplish it, and the rest of us had to stand around and wait for them.
Oh, great. Oh, great. So you wrote letters home,
Oh, yes.
and were they censored?
No, I don't think so.
So your family knew where you were?
Well, except we did go on maneuvers, as I told you. On 3 occasions we left the States, and we were in the Caribbean or in the North Atlantic, so there were times when we weren't available for mail call, and they had to use Fleet Marine Force, Post Office identification numbers in order to find us.
And did you form any friends that you still are friendly with? Usually there's a little bit of a bonding.
Yeah, we've got, I don't think at this time there is anybody in my Marine Corps experience that I have contacted in the last 10 years or so.
And did you ever join a veterans group of any kind?
No, I never did. The Marine Corps is one in which celebrates their anniversary on the 10th of November every year, and I have gone for probably at least 15 or 20 years to a regional celebration of that anniversary. So I see Marine Corps buddies, but none of which were in my either platoon or during the time that I was in the service. So now everybody is at least Korean or Vietnam or more recent Iraq or Afghanistan.
Given your experience in the military, how do you feel, and does it change how you feel about what's going on now in terms of the wars? In other words, having lived through a wartime experience, does that...
Well, let me not answer the question directly as you pose it. Let me just say this, that I think it's been a mistake that they haven't mandated that all young men will have 1 year or 2 years of service in order to bring them down to earth and to humiliate them a little bit, I guess.
Learn their manners.
And I think that would be good experience just as a general rule. Now, back to your other question. Give me that one again.
Well, I just wondered how you feel about the current wars, given that you served in one, because I think there's a difference between that and the person who's never had any contact with it.
Well, I think militarily, I think we have made some horrible mistakes, starting with Iraq, in terms of quote, winning the fighting war, but then get so involved in the politics of what followed. I don't think we've gotten the backing, if you want to call it, of the native Iraqi populace. And if the job were turned over to them, sink or swim, 6 months after Hussein was toppled, and they didn't want to perform or take over the responsibility, I would say that U.S. troops would come home. That's what I think. And I think we're trying to play the same game now in Afghanistan on the basis of loading the place up with troops, but having no positive response from the natives who are living there in Afghanistan.
Tough call. You'd think by now we could sit down and have a civilized conversation and come to agreements without the fighting, but that's naive.
Well, I think after a point why it's, U.S. says, and they do say this, but they don't back it up, you take over the responsibilities or we're going home. And they've been saying that in Iraq for 7 years now.
Long time. Do you have anything you want to add? Any stories you want to tell that we didn't get to? We don't want you to leave anything out.
Well, I could tell another story.
Go ahead. I like your stories.
I already said I was a radio operator, but I wasn't high speed. But what always amazed me, and particularly on a network, which I was aboard this AGS, which was the Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Fleet ship. So the messages that filtered back and forth from there had to be handled correctly and fast. And we had a few in our group that could handle that well, and I couldn't, so I wouldn't even attempted that. But what amazed me was a young man by the name of Olson, who could, and this was done with a typewriter, he could listen to code coming in, and he could listen for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, not doing anything. And then after he had captured that 45 seconds of code, Morse code, he would go to his typewriter, just as fast as this, and he'd type. And then he would pick his cigarette up and puff the cigarette, listen some more. Amazing how the capability of somebody like that who could listen to and transcribe Morse code as quickly and as efficiently as he could do it.
It's like the UN translators. I've never understood how they can listen in one language and be translating in the other all at the same time. It's amazing. Anything else? You got more stories?
Well, this won't go into print, will it?
No, but you were discharged.
Oh, I got a lot of stories.
Oh, good.
All right.
Tell me another story.
Okay, we're in the heavy seas in the North Atlantic, and a destroyer pulls along on our starboard side, and they try to shoot a line from one ship to the other so that they can now put a more substantial line in which they can transfer mail, which is coming across now from ship. That's our mail arriving on a destroyer, and it's going to be sent to us by this glorified clothesline. And the destroyer crew don't know what the hell they're doing, and they can't even get a line from their ship. They fire a line with something that's akin to a shotgun, but it's something that's powered, and it's throwing a string. It's a little more than a string, but it's a clothesline. And from the clothesline, they can pull out a heavier hawser, which is now going to be the transport method between the two ships. Well, they failed to do that. They haven't got a line. Commander-in-Chief is at the ship that we're on, and he sees the humility of, don't know what they're doing. So he's telling them to stand off, or equivalent. And they do. Now the captain on the destroyer thinks that he can do better because he's not close enough. So he has to come closer in order to see whether or not he can get this line across there. Well, unfortunately, in the heavy seas, in the rolling seas, he makes an attempt, but his attempt is a failure. And he comes alongside, and he's still got, well, the Navy would call it the hooks, but the anchors are up on the bow of the, and he comes in close enough and he loses control, and the hooks on his anchors gashed the side of the ship we were on.
Oh my.
And you can imagine he didn't get any medals for that.
Now, what was the name of the commander of the fleet?
The fleet, geez, I can't remember his name now. I probably have it written somewhere, but he was commander-in-chief. He was on board, and he was commander-in-chief, Atlantic Fleet. And that's quite
a big thing.
Pompous, sort of a full admiral type
Yeah.
ranking.
Yeah. All right, do you have any more? You start.
Well, occasionally we did have to go on maneuvers, and most of the maneuvers were off into the Caribbean area, and specifically, I think as mentioned before, the island of Vieques. And mode of transportation now was APA class naval ship, broader beam than a destroyer and probably 50% longer, but probably could carry 1,000 or 1,200 troops. And having approached now the landing area, or the potential landing area, while we were offshore probably half, 3/4 of a mile in a rolling surf, not a storm surf, but a rolling surf. And our job was now to become fully accoutred with rifle, field pack, cartridge belt, helmet, and we were asked to climb down cargo nets which were slung over the side of the ship. And we were also informed that we must keep our helmet chin strap tightly controlled so we didn't lose our helmet and hit somebody as the helmet fell. And it often appeared to me a little bit of a problem because if we had been misguided and didn't land where we were supposed to, why we were so loaded that we would have sunk like a rock if we had landed in the water. The object now was to get into the LCVP, which was a, probably 40-foot long, 40 horsepower, rear screw engine with a drop leaf front on the boat, which was allow us to embark or disembark having come into shore. The ride into shore and then the landing itself on a sandy beach, not too bad, but we were also cautioned that we should never disembark from this landing craft off the extreme end of the ramp, because the following swells that were battering the back of the boat could drive the boat inward and therefore cause injury. So live and learn.
And my last question is, did you qualify for the GI Bill of Rights?
When I was discharged from the Marine Corps, I returned to college, and without the benefit of the GI Bill of Rights, I think it would have been a difficult task for my parents to continue my education, but the Bill of Rights did a wonderful job.
And one other thought, what did you do after you got out of the service? After the education? My background was electrical engineering, and I went to Worcester Polytech. And since I was a third-generation employee of the Collins Company, it was a toss of a coin, I guess, but I was leaning that way, and I garnered a wage package that was slightly different than I could have done in Hartford or other locations, but I was living only a mile away from the work door, so it seemed like that was a horse trade, in which I spent 15 years with the Collins Company. And then I left the Collins Company and went working for the Torrington Company in Torrington, which was a major bearing industry and textile needle industry. And I gave them 25 years before I retired there as Director of Plant Engineering. Well, we thank you very much for the interview.